Let's turn our attention back to Kenya and checking in on how the overall market performed for the day. Big bounce there, up by 0.8%, 4,561 points. Foreigners buying in the market today, and that of course helping lift some blue chips. Looking at how the currency is faring on the day, 87.55 against the greenback. You're looking at the shilling stable, but a noticeable depreciation from the start of the year. So let's cross over to Nairobi and get an update on what's driving the markets as it stands. Crispus Otieno, Equities Dealer at AIB Capital, is standing by. Crispus, thanks for your time. I mentioned foreigners are back in the market, or a bit more aggressive in the market today. Talk to us about the kind of the ratio between foreign buying and local buying.
The foreigners, I think I'm glad to say the foreigners are back to the market. We are seeing today, we saw foreigners accounting for well over 60% of the total market turnover. That is a vote of confidence ahead of the general elections to be held on March 4th.
Let's talk about some of the interesting movements on the day, because Barclays Bank, which Barclays Bank of Kenya, BBK as it's known, the fourth highest mover today, and the assets of Barclays Bank moving to be owned by Barclays Africa, which of course is owned by ABSA. There's some controversy around that deal from the shareholder perspective of ABSA, but what are your thoughts right now on all the Barclays Group moving to be managed by the ABSA Group here in South Africa rather?
As we've seen, ABSA Group has a rich heritage, and so is all the Barclays banks in Africa. So I think going forward, they will be able to benefit immensely from the expertise provided by ABSA Group. Mm-hmm. And then I think in terms of organization, we are going to have a more a management structure that is actually much nearer to the customers, because I believe South Africa is much nearer to Kenya than the UK.
Yeah. So of course that switch around, we know that ABSA would intend to grow its business on the continent and compete with the largest Standard Bank, who is the biggest bank on the African continent. But BBK has kind of traditionally been more prudent in its lending, being more of a corporate bank in Kenya. Of course, it does have that retail element. Do you think that strategy is likely to change?
We saw in the later part of the last decade, we saw Barclays trying to move on to the mass market. Trying to follow into the footsteps of Equity Bank. But I don't know whether it became a success or not. I'm not so sure. But I know that what it resulted was a high level of default and bad debts. So even if they had to go down that route again, they'll have to move very cautiously. Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to Safaricom. Yet another innovation coming through from them. They're allowing M-Pesa users to shop online, and that, of course, interesting. Also partnering up with a South African firm known as PayGate. Give us some color to this deal. Tell us about how it's meant to work, and what type of opportunities will it present, firstly, to Safaricom in terms of revenue generation.
Normally, what I've seen in the frontier markets is that plastic cards are not so. The uptake of cards is not so high. So again, that also limits the use of internet payment solutions. But this thing, the partnership that Safaricom has, that's beautiful, because the client does not need to have a card, a Visa or a MasterCard for that matter. Mm-hmm. All the client needs is an M-Pesa account. That will definitely revolutionize internet-based transactions, because I believe it will work. It will work like the client just keys in his details, and the money is debited or credited in whichever manner. That makes it simple and in a language that people can understand. So and then the uptake of the mobile phone penetration as opposed to card-based transaction penetration is much higher in Kenya than is much higher. So of course we expect to see stronger volumes going forward.
But what about issues around logistics and distribution of the goods that they purchase online? That should, I'm sure they've thought about this, but surely that should be a concern, given the fact that distribution networks are, of course, a little bit harder in places like Kenya.
Unfortunately, in Kenya, infrastructure, IT has moved faster than infrastructure growth. At times, I only wish you could transport things over. We could transport goods over the net too. Of course, again, as we go forward, that will be a challenge because if you look at infrastructure development, our roads and rail network, it's not up to par. I mean, it's not that up to scratch. So, of course, delivery is going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Ati River mining. We spoke about it early on in the show this week, but yet one of the top gainers on the market once again today, and it's up by up to 7.96. Your thoughts on Ati River mining and where the stock's headed right now, because it really seems to be one of those momentum players.
For Ati River mining, if you look at the trade, it accounted for well over 70% of the total turnover today. So, but then again, if you look at their share, at the amount of free float that it has, it's not so much so as to really move the market to those levels. So I think that I don't expect the price to move that much because I don't believe that turnover was influenced by fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. So 61 shillings, do you think you'll see selling from there on out?
Really, I could 70 is where I'd put my money on.